This is a true story, but the names of the characters have been changed. Imagine thinking you have the perfect life, a loving spouse, and a family you've built over years. Now, imagine finding subtle clues, a late night, a secret phone, a hidden past, that shatter everything you thought was true. This is my story of trust betrayed, of painful discovery, and the journey that followed. Get ready, as I reveal the heartbreaking truth and how I chose to confront it head-on. This isn't just a story, it's a lesson on love, loss, and finding yourself again. My name is Alex, and I'm 33 years old. My wife, Sarah, is 3 years younger. We met around 2012 at a corporate event in New York. I had been working in finance for a while, and she had just moved from California, working as a freelance graphic designer. To be honest, I was immediately captivated by Sarah, her bright smile, soft brown hair, and unique charm. After that, we would often meet up for coffee and chat about everything and nothing at various cafes around Brooklyn. Before long, I realized I didn't want to let this amazing woman slip away, so I decided to propose. In 2013, we held a small, intimate wedding by the river with family and a few close friends. It wasn't elaborate, but it was meaningful. That day, I promised Sarah that we would build a strong, lasting home together, no matter what life brought our way. Our family felt even more complete in 2018 when our first child, Noah, was born. He's 6 years old now. Noah is a lively, bright little boy who takes after his mother with his brown eyes and playful smile. On weekends, Sarah and I often take him to the park, where we'll go on a little outing just to get a change of scenery as a family. Noah's favorite destination is the Bronx Zoo. He's especially fascinated by the giraffe and loves telling me it's his tallest friend in the whole world. One time, when he was 3, I got caught up in a work call and looked away for just a moment, only to find him happily playing in the middle of the petting zoo pen, covered in mud. Sarah and I just looked at each other and laughed, such a small moment, but it brightened our whole day. For my family, I always do my best to manage my work so I can be present for the important moments. Every morning, I make breakfast for all of us and take Noah to the nearby school. He loves the eggs and toast I make, proudly telling everyone it's Dad's special breakfast just for me. On Friday nights, we sit together and watch a movie of Noah's choice. I've always thought that family happiness doesn't come from grand gestures, but from these simple moments together, caring about even the smallest details. Deep down, I believe that as long as we love each other and are there for each other, this home we've built will always stand strong. But as time went on, I started feeling an unease I couldn't ignore. Recently, I noticed some strange changes in Sarah's behavior. Before, she'd always come straight home after work, usually around 6 in the evening. Sometimes she'd even have dinner ready before I got back, or we'd cook together, talking about our day. Lately, though, she's been coming home late, and often without a heads up. When I'd ask, she'd say she had to stay for a meeting or that she was out with coworkers. At first, I didn't think much of it, figuring work can get busy from time to time. But this pattern continued, week after week, with no sign of it being temporary. My concern grew, especially since Sarah started keeping her phone closer than before. And then, she set up a passcode on her phone, which she'd never done before. Little by little, these small changes planted seeds of doubt, as if there was something Sarah wasn't sharing with me. One night, I stumbled upon something that deepened my worry. While looking for my coat in the hallway closet, I heard a faint buzzing sound. At first, I thought it was my own phone, but when I couldn't find it, I realized the sound was coming from a hidden spot in the closet. It was coming from Sarah's old handbag, a bag she hardly ever used and typically kept tucked away. That night, though, it was placed right on top as if it had been moved recently. I hesitated but eventually took the bag out and gently opened it. Inside was another phone, completely new, unlike any device she'd ever mentioned. It wasn't an old phone or some forgotten gadget. I felt my heart sink as questions spun in my mind. Why did she have this phone, and why hadn't she told me about it? The phone was also locked with a passcode, something Sarah had never bothered with before. After a moment, I tried a few familiar codes, but none worked. The screen remained locked, and the mystery around the phone only deepened my confusion. My doubts grew, as if something hidden was beginning to unravel beyond my control. Later that evening, after a lot of hesitation, I decided to confront Sarah about the phone. When I held it up, she looked momentarily startled and gave a slight smile, but I sensed something uneasy behind it. She paused, then casually said it was an old phone she hadn't used in ages. "You know I've had this for a while," she said, her tone slightly hesitant as if she was trying to cover something. Without missing a beat, Sarah quickly shifted the topic, talking about her work and our plans for dinner tomorrow, clearly hoping to end the conversation as quickly as possible. This wasn't like her. Normally, Sarah was open and direct, rarely evasive when I asked questions, no matter how minor. But now, with just a phone, she seemed tense and uncomfortable. Why would she avoid the topic if it was truly just an old device? This question weighed heavily on me. Looking at the unfamiliar phone with its locked screen, I felt like things were no longer as simple as they seemed. After Sarah left the room, I sat in silence, my mind clouded with thoughts. Small details from the past few weeks suddenly came into focus, her late arrivals, her constant attachment to her phone, and now this secret phone. Before, I might have brushed it off, but now, these suspicions were building, spreading like a fire I couldn't put out. I began wondering if I had trusted her too much to notice the small signs that had been appearing. Sitting alone in the dimly lit room, I felt trapped between the truth and my own trust, not sure which path to take. Sarah's little changes, seemingly harmless on their own, now looked like scattered pieces forming an unclear but troubling picture. I wondered if there was something much bigger she was keeping from me, something I wasn't ready to face. But once doubt begins, it's like an unstoppable undercurrent that refuses to fade. I started showing up coincidentally at the places Sarah mentioned she'd be, hoping to understand the changes I was sensing. One evening, Sarah told me she'd be working late because of an upcoming project deadline. So, I drove to her office building, parked at a cafe across the street, and picked a seat from where I could observe without drawing attention. It was twilight, around 7 p.m., and the streets were still bustling with the warm glow of city lights. I sat there, trying not to stare at her building too directly, just keeping an eye on the entrance. The office lights were still on, but there was no sign of Sarah. After about half an hour of patient waiting, I finally saw her leaving with a colleague. They walked out together, chatting and laughing. Seeing Sarah so at ease brought me a small sense of relief, though a heavy feeling lingered within. I briefly thought of walking over to greet her but hesitated, worried she might think I was following her. That evening at home, I casually asked about her work. "It seems like this project is keeping you late recently?" I tried to sound calm. Sarah laughed, saying that work had indeed been hectic and that she needed extra time to finish everything. "It's just work, don't worry," she reassured me, speaking lightly as if to ease my concern. I nodded as if I understood, but deep down, a part of me still doubted. Another time, Sarah mentioned she'd be out for dinner with a few old friends I didn't know at a small restaurant downtown. For some reason, her plans stirred a sense of unease in me. So, I decided to drop by that part of town to see if things were as she'd said. I went to a cafe near the restaurant, picked a seat where I could watch the entrance, and ordered a coffee, though my mind was far from focused on my drink. About 15 minutes later, I saw Sarah walk into the restaurant with a few friends, as she'd said. Her group included 3 or 4 people, and they entered with an easy, cheerful vibe. Sarah laughed and walked closely beside an unfamiliar man, looking completely relaxed, which got me thinking. That night, when I got home, I carefully brought up her dinner. Must have been nice to catch up with old friends after so long. I tried to sound casual, showing no hint of doubt. Sarah nodded, explaining that everyone was busy, so it was rare to find time to meet. She even shared a few funny stories from the evening, but something still felt off. It was as though Sarah's answers had a subtle barrier, leaving me feeling more distant than ever. Finally, I decided to try another approach, staying late at work a few times to see if Sarah did anything unusual when I wasn't around. One night, I sent her a message saying I'd be working overtime, then stayed at the office, watching the clock and wondering what she might be doing alone. When I got home that night, I found Sarah already asleep, and the house was quiet. The next evening, I casually asked if she did anything special while I was out, but she just smiled shyly and said no, that she'd just relaxed. Her embarrassed smile only fueled my doubts further, as though there was something hidden just out of my reach. The doubts alone weren't enough to clarify everything, so after many days of hesitation, I decided to seek the help of a private investigator named Hank. Hank had experience in cases like this, recommended by a friend, which reassured me. Our first meeting took place at a small cafe in the city. Sitting across from him, I explained Sarah's recent changes, her consistently late returns, keeping her phone close, and suddenly adding a password, something she'd never done before. Hank listened carefully, nodding occasionally with a calm and professional demeanor. He asked for more details, like when the changes began and if I knew of any new friends or colleagues she might be seeing. I hesitated, realizing I didn't know much about Sarah's new social circle. At times, it felt as though I was describing a stranger, not the person I'd shared my life with for years. Hank took detailed notes, asking about Sarah's habits before these changes, trying to get a clear picture. Watching him work gave me some relief, as if things would soon make sense. Before leaving, Hank assured me everything would be handled discreetly, without leaving a trace. "Trust me, my job is to uncover the truth," he said with conviction. Hearing this, I felt a bit lighter, as though I'd found a path out of my lingering doubts. Hank said he'd start immediately, tracking Sarah's activities to spot any unusual patterns. Leaving the cafe, it felt as if I'd set down a heavy burden. While I had no idea what Hank might discover, I hoped that within a few days, I'd have clear answers. Part of me still wanted to believe Sarah hadn't done anything wrong, that my doubts were unfounded. But if there was anything hidden, I needed to know and confront it. Throughout Hank's week of surveillance, he sent me daily updates. On the first day, Hank reported that Sarah was indeed working late at the office, staying until after 7 p.m. She was inside, working with colleagues and showing no unusual behavior. Hearing this eased my mind slightly, though I still wasn't fully convinced. The next evening, Hank said he saw Sarah out at a restaurant with a group of friends. When she came home that night, I casually asked if she had seen anyone. Sarah answered naturally, mentioning some coworkers she hadn't seen in a while. She laughed, saying they'd had so much fun talking that they'd lost track of time. Her words and behavior seemed completely normal, yet I couldn't shake the lingering doubt. By the fourth day, Hank reported that Sarah stayed late at the office again, working with another group of colleagues. He said he'd thoroughly checked her activities, finding nothing out of the ordinary. While I listened to him, my worry didn't fade. That night, lying next to Sarah as she slept peacefully, I felt a wave of guilt. Here was Sarah, a devoted partner, and I'd hired someone to watch her just because of a few small changes. But before long, this guilt gave way to a sense of uncertainty, and I convinced myself to wait for more concrete information. At the end of the week, Hank called with his final report, saying everything appeared normal. He'd monitored Sarah's schedule thoroughly, even the late nights, but found nothing suspicious. His words made me feel relieved, as if a huge weight had been lifted. The tension that had built up over the week gradually faded, leaving me with a sense of calm knowing there was nothing to worry about. However, alongside the relief, I felt a wave of regret. For the past week, I'd been so consumed by suspicion that I'd hired someone to watch my own wife. Imagining Sarah working hard and coming home with her usual smile made me feel ashamed. My baseless worries had driven me to act rashly, potentially damaging our trust. I thought about the recent days when Sarah continued caring for our family while I grew distant due to my suspicions. The feeling of guilt lingered, and I promised myself that I would never let this happen again. Instead of doubting, I realized I needed to be a more understanding husband and father. I decided to spend more time with my family, focusing on Sarah and Noah wholeheartedly. Rather than letting negative feelings take over, I would work on building trust and nurturing the happiness we had created together. That evening, sitting with my family, I felt lighter than ever. Watching Noah play joyfully and seeing Sarah carefully prepare dinner, I realized how truly precious and simple happiness could be. Committed to leaving my doubts behind, I vowed to protect this happiness with everything I had and not let negative thoughts cloud what mattered most in life. However, the following afternoon, Sarah called, saying she was busy and couldn't pick up Noah from school like she usually did. She told me not to wait, just to go ahead and pick him up myself. At first, I didn't think much of it, but there was a strange feeling, as she rarely missed picking up Noah. While driving to the school, I stopped at a traffic light and noticed Sarah across the street. At first, I smiled, thinking she had wrapped up her work early and wanted to surprise us. But my smile quickly faded as I took a closer look. Sarah wasn't alone. Beside her was a man, the same one I had seen her with at that friend gathering. He was younger than me, well-dressed, and they were walking arm in arm, laughing and completely at ease, without a care about who might be watching. The sight felt like a blow to my mind, leaving me frozen in place, unable to believe what I was seeing. I can't describe how I felt at that moment. Part of me wanted to jump out of the car and ask her what was happening, but I held myself back, knowing I shouldn't act impulsively. I just sat there for a while, watching her from a distance, my mind tangled in confusion. Eventually, I decided not to confront her right then. I calmed myself and drove to Noah's school to pick him up as usual. Once he was in the car, I tried to keep our conversation light, asking him about his day, but inside, I felt completely hollow. The entire drive home, I listened to Noah talk, but my mind was stuck on that image of Sarah and the other man. After that day, I knew I couldn't keep guessing. If everything was as bad as I feared, I needed solid proof to confront it. So I started keeping closer tabs on Sarah, tracking her schedule. When she claimed she was working late or meeting friends, I discreetly checked to see if things were as she said. I also began trying to find out who that man was. Outwardly, I kept up appearances, but inside, I was torn between hurt and anger. My thoughts revolved around finding out the truth, whatever it might be. Unable to let the doubts go, I asked Hank to look deeper into the man I had seen with Sarah. A few days later, Hank got back to me. His voice was calm, but his words hit like a shock. The man's name was James, about Sarah's age. They'd known each other since high school, attending the same university, and, to my surprise, James was actually her first love. Hank told me they'd dated in college, but he'd gone abroad to study, and they'd broken up. Hearing this left me stunned, as Sarah had never mentioned James or this part of her past. The man she was now so close to was someone who had once been extremely special to her. I began to feel as though everything I thought I knew about Sarah was only part of the story. In the following days, Hank continued tracking Sarah and updating me, each report like another cut as the truth took shape. Hank discovered that James had returned to the country in 2017, shortly before Noah was born. From that time, Sarah and James had reconnected and maintained contact without my knowledge. Hank mentioned that the times Sarah claimed to be working late or attending unexpected events were often occasions when she met up with James. I felt a growing weight with each revelation, knowing now that my suspicions hadn't been mere paranoia. The times Hank hadn't found anything unusual were simply because James had been traveling. Recently, though, with him back, their meetings had resumed. Hank noted that Sarah carefully planned these meetings, making sure I'd be busy or unaware. Each new detail felt like more irrefutable proof of what was between them, and I couldn't ignore the reality that was being laid out. Hank even showed me pictures he'd taken of them leaving a hotel together. What I'd dismissed as coincidental or harmless now felt like genuine betrayal. Reflecting on everything, I saw the subtle signs I'd overlooked, her late returns, hurried calls, the way she kept her phone close. All of it now pieced together into a clear picture of deceit. It felt as though I'd been living in a play, unaware of the secrets that lay behind the scenes. Standing before this harsh truth, I felt as if my entire world was collapsing. This was more than losing trust in a partner, it was the heartbreak of realizing the fragility of the family I'd worked so hard to build. I understood then that everything I believed in was just a fragile shell, hiding a deeper collapse that had started long before I'd noticed. What made the pain even worse was realizing that the gifts Sarah often brought home for Noah, the toys, the clothes, were from her. They'd actually been bought by James. All this time, Sarah had claimed they were gifts she picked up to make up for her busy schedule, a way to show her love and care for our child. I'd trusted her words without the slightest doubt. But now, the truth felt like a cold blade cutting deep. Thinking back to every moment Noah happily received a gift, every smile from Sarah as she handed him those items, I saw it was all just a carefully crafted illusion. Each item Noah had cherished hadn't come from his mother, but from another man. It was as though my whole world had shattered, as if all the trust I'd had was now just a hollow illusion, fragile and ready to break. No solid ground remained, and all the faith I'd placed in Sarah left me feeling empty. My heart grew heavy as I recalled everything I once trusted, now confronted by the painful truth of deceit. Watching Noah's joy with each new gift, I had always thought it was a symbol of his mother's love. But in reality, those items carried a hidden message, a trace of a relationship kept secret. I stood there, deep in thought, overwhelmed with bitterness and sorrow, finally realizing that everything I'd worked to protect had only been a thin cover over a profound betrayal. After listening to Hank reveal too many undeniable truths, I felt numb, as though my emotions had turned to stone. Realizing that Sarah and James were only meeting in secret but had been concealing their relationship for so long left me with nothing to believe in. Every memory, each moment I thought was genuine, now seemed to blur into faded recollections. Determined to confront them, I crafted a clear plan. One morning, I calmly told Sarah I'd be going on a business trip for a few days, using work as an excuse and mentioning that I'd be hard to reach during that time. She nodded in agreement, with a calm expression that hinted at no suspicion. Before leaving, I quietly attached a tracking device to her phone, carefully ensuring she wouldn't discover it. Never did I think I'd resort to this with the person I once trusted the most, but at this point, things had gone too far. I needed to uncover the truth for myself. Leaving the house, I drove to a small cafe nearby, found a quiet corner seat, and opened the tracking app. After hours of monitoring her movements on the screen, I drove to the location where the tracker showed she had stopped, an unassuming house on the city outskirts. Moments later, James appeared, the very man Hank had identified. He approached the house door confidently, and when Sarah opened it, he greeted her with a warm smile, one I had never seen her direct at me. I moved closer to the house, standing outside as I carefully looked through the window. They stood facing each other, within a private setting I'd never known. James' voice drifted out, clear and carrying a deep meaning. "I've waited long enough, Sarah." His tone held a hint of frustration, as though he was urging her to make a final decision. "You keep saying you need time, but for how long? It's time you made a choice. Are you going to leave, or are we going to keep hiding like this?" Sarah was silent for a moment, then sighed, her voice uncertain. "I know, but things aren't as simple as you think. Alex isn't someone who'll take this lightly, and there's also Noah." Her voice trailed off, as though she was trying to avoid giving a direct answer. But James cut her off, his tone laced with impatience. "Noah is our son, have you forgotten? I want him in my life, I want to be there for him. I can't let you keep living a double life like this." His words struck me like a thunderbolt, leaving me frozen by the window. Noah wasn't my son? That single sentence made my entire world collapse. Waves of bitterness and anger surged through me, James' every word echoing, tearing through any last sense of trust and security I once had. I once believed that if the truth ever came to light, I would be strong enough to walk away, file for a divorce from Sarah, and start a new life with Noah, the boy I had always loved and cared for as if he were my own flesh and blood. I envisioned a peaceful life somewhere else, just the two of us, building a new beginning together. But now, with this harsh truth revealed, all my plans have collapsed. The child I had protected with all my heart turned out not to be my own. James' words about Noah being his son echoed relentlessly, like a sharp blade cutting deep into me. Inside, Sarah continued to explain, her voice soft as if trying to calm the situation. "You know I want to be with you and Noah," she said, her voice shaking. "But if we separate now, everything will fall apart. Alex has been with Noah since he was born. I can't just walk away that easily. Hearing this, my heart felt even heavier, like I had been both deceived and stripped of what mattered most to me. Every word from Sarah and Jane struck me like a cold dagger, each confirming a truth I had never imagined. Looking back on all my memories with Noah, I was filled with anger and sorrow, uncertain of my next step. Noah had been my whole world, yet now, everything felt like an illusion. The plans I once had for a new life seemed meaningless, as even the bond between Noah and me was built on something that wasn't real. Each memory, every moment, now lingered in my mind like a bitter dream. Unable to endure it any longer, I pushed the door open with force, startling both Sarah and Jane as they turned toward me. Sarah's eyes filled with fear and confusion, while Jane stood frozen, unsure of how to respond to my sudden presence. Sarah took a step back, her hands trembling, eyes pleading yet unable to hide her panic. The room fell silent, so quiet that I could almost hear the pounding of my own heart, fueled by a mix of anger and deep pain. Sarah lowered her gaze, her lips parting slightly, as if searching for an explanation. "Alex, please, let me explain, it's not what you think," she stammered, her eyes red and welling up. But I had no patience left to hear another word. I pulled out the photos that Hank had taken and threw them onto the table in front of them. "So this is what the two of you have been doing behind my back?" I said, each word hitting like a blade. I looked directly at Sarah, my voice sharp. "So Noah, he isn't my son?" The bitter words hung in the air, and Sarah choked up, unable to respond. As I threw the photos onto the table, James looked at them for a moment, then slowly raised his gaze, a challenging glint in his eyes. He smirked, as if everything I had just revealed meant nothing to him. "You know," he began, his tone steady but laced with sarcasm. "Sarah and I have been together for years. She belonged to me long before you came along." His calm words only fueled the anger rising within me. Sarah kept her head down, standing silently beside him without stopping him, which only made my resentment boil over. Jane raised an eyebrow and continued, his tone growing increasingly taunting. "Sarah never forgot me. Do you really think you could ever replace me?" He let out a cold laugh, his eyes filled with a sense of satisfaction, and went on, "Thanks for taking care of Noah while I couldn't be here. Now that everything's out in the open, I suppose there's no reason left for you to stay." His words hit my pride like sharp blows, pushing me to my absolute limit. Unable to hold back any longer, I lunged forward, landing a punch square on James' face, fueled by the fury that had built up for so long. The blow made him stumble, but he quickly regained his footing and struck back, hitting my shoulder with equal force. We clashed, both of us consumed by anger, as if all the restraint we'd held was now erupting in a storm of punches. My mind was clouded with resentment, each hit an attempt to release the bitterness and pain I'd endured. Jane didn't relent, he retaliated, his punches meeting mine with the same intensity. We threw ourselves at each other, every blow adding to the fire of anger blazing inside me. The heavy sounds of fists hitting flesh echoed through the room, filled with everything I couldn't express in words: betrayal, anger, and grief. Sarah backed away, her eyes wide with fear, calling my name in a shaky voice. She clapped her hand over her mouth, standing there in shock, unable to come closer. Her silence and horror only deepened my sense of bitterness. Neither of us was willing to step back. Punch followed punch, neither willing to give in. Every taunt from James, every deception from Sarah, every broken moment of trust, I couldn't hold anything back anymore. For a moment, James staggered backward, losing his balance, and slipped on the floor. He fell heavily, struggling to catch his breath, one hand pressed against the ground as he tried but failed to push himself up. Sarah screamed, her eyes wide with panic, and rushed to his side. She knelt down, supporting him, her hands trembling, worry etched deeply on her face. Meanwhile, I stood there, breathing heavily, a hollow feeling settling over me. Looking at them, I realized I had nothing left to say, nothing left to hold on to. Gasping for air, I turned away, each step feeling like the weight of all my disappointment. I turned and walked away from James and Sarah's house, feeling so hollow that even the weight of emotions seemed absent. Each step toward my car felt like it carried the burden of every ounce of pain, disappointment, and anger within me. Dusk was settling in, casting an eerie quiet over everything, broken only by the sound of my heavy footsteps in the silence. I struggled to keep the flood of emotions inside, but every step reminded me of what had just happened, of a betrayal I never saw coming. Sinking into the driver's seat, I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me like a relentless tide. The hurt and pent-up anger of all these weeks felt ready to explode. In a surge of frustration, I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, the sharp sound echoing in the quiet car, offering no release, no solace. Inside, it felt as if everything had been torn apart, with bitterness and fury merging into an uncontrollable storm. Staring into the void before me, I felt as though I was adrift, caught between harsh reality and a fading memory. Images of Sarah, of Noah, and of the family I'd worked so hard to build kept surfacing, each one pushing me further into the abyss. Everything I had believed in, everything I'd tried so hard to protect, now lay shattered beyond repair. I sat quietly for a while, then finally started the engine and drove away, leaving behind everything that no longer had a place in my life. On the drive home, my anger burned intensely. As I finally pulled up to the house, my hands were still gripping the steering wheel tightly, as if trying to hold in every bit of emotion. But the pain wouldn't fade. Stepping out of the car, I saw Noah running toward me from the doorway, his face lit up with excitement. "Dad," he called out with a bright, innocent voice, his little feet hurrying across the yard. His innocent look, his radiant smile, they pierced my heart deeply. I gazed at him, and in that instant, my anger surged back even more fiercely. Thoughts of Sarah and James, along with his arrogant words about their child, flared up inside, pushing me to the brink. I raised my hand, my vision blurred with rage. All the pain and resentment had gathered, and my hand shook. But right then, Noah's innocent eyes looked up at me, completely unaware of all that had just unfolded. He stopped, his face shifting from joy to worry, and then to fear. "Dad, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice softening, his eyes filling with tears as he took a step back, starting to sob. His cries snapped me back to reality. Slowly, my hand lowered, weighed down by a pain even greater than anger. Seeing Noah standing there, his eyes filled with tears, it felt as though my heart was being squeezed. Every tear that fell was like a painful reminder cutting deeper, yet I couldn't turn back, couldn't offer him comfort. My hands clenched into fists, then loosened in helplessness. Noah called out, his voice thick with sadness, "Dad, please don't go." His plea tugged at me, but my legs stayed firm as I walked toward the car. I knew that if I stopped, I might never be able to leave. As his cries echoed behind me, I closed my eyes tightly, took a deep breath, and kept moving forward. Those sounds of his heartbreak echoed over and over, but I couldn't look back. Sitting in the car, I gripped the steering wheel, trying to calm myself, but an overwhelming emptiness took over. I shut the door firmly, hoping to drown out the echoes from behind, started the engine, and drove away, not daring to glance back. Darkness covered the road ahead, and the streetlights passed by in a blur. Inside, there was only the searing ache of having left behind Noah and all that I had once held as my happiness and my life. His image, standing there, calling out to me in despair, etched itself into my mind. Driving into the night, I realized I'd left behind everything I once considered family, everything I'd once loved. After the shock, I sank into a profound sadness, as though the world had crumbled around me. Day after day, everything seemed to lose its meaning. The familiar joys and simple things that once made me happy now felt like faded shades of gray. I existed in a void, as though floating in an endless, empty space with nothing to hold on to. In those unbearable moments, I turned to my family. Sitting with them, I didn't have to hide the pain or pretend to be strong. They asked no questions, made no judgments, just quietly sat with me, listening whenever I needed to talk. Sometimes, there was only silence, but that silence felt like a comfort, as though I wasn't bearing everything alone. A gentle hand on my shoulder, understanding looks, a warm cup of tea placed silently, all of it brought a sense of warmth at a time when everything felt lost. In these simple gestures, I found a sense of relief, like pieces of my burden were gradually being lifted. There was no need for advice or well-meaning words, just being there, offering quiet support, was enough. It allowed me to start facing reality, even though I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Those peaceful days helped me slowly emerge from the darkness, beginning a journey to acceptance and self-recovery, step by step, little by little. As time passed, I gradually learned to let go and rebuild my life, bit by bit, no longer allowing shadows of the past to obscure my path. Each morning, I would wake up early, make myself a fragrant cup of coffee, and stand by the window, watching the city awaken under the morning light. That quietness brought a calmness to my mind, as if each day was a new beginning, free from the weight of old wounds. In my free time, I allowed myself to enjoy the simple things I'd once overlooked. I explored small restaurants tucked away in hidden alleys that I had always meant to visit but never did. I reconnected with old friends, sharing stories that felt like they belonged to another era. I even joined community activities I'd once passed over in the rush of work and family obligations. These small moments brought a sense of renewal, reminding me I could still find enjoyment in each day. With each passing day, the pain within remained, but I learned to let it be part of me without allowing it to dominate my life. Step by step, I rediscovered who I was, giving myself a chance to live forward, free from the hold of the past. The pain and loss slowly transformed into memories I could face calmly, letting me look toward the future with a stronger heart, open to new things. Eventually, when I felt ready, I decided to meet Sarah to discuss the divorce arrangements. We met at a small cafe, the same place we had once visited together, sharing our dreams and hopes for life when things were still peaceful. Entering the cafe, I looked around and suddenly saw Sarah, but she was not alone. James and Noah were with her. The three of them sat together, an unmistakable closeness in their laughter and warmth, like people who had been together for a long time. I stood still, observing the scene with a mix of indescribable emotions. A quiet sadness crept into my heart, as if I were looking back at a part of my past, distant yet familiar. Sarah, James, and Noah seemed to have become a real family, a reality I had to accept. Memories of love and trust surfaced, yet no longer filled me with anger or pain. All the resentment, the weight that once burdened me, had faded with time, leaving a sense of calm and lightness. I took a deep breath, walked slowly toward them, and as I approached, Sarah turned to look at me. Her eyes showed a hint of hesitation. We sat down together, but there was no tension or heaviness. I realized I had truly let go and was ready to move forward without being pulled back by the past. Looking at that scene one last time, I understood that my path was now different, and what once belonged to Sarah now belonged there, with the family she had chosen. After that meeting, I walked out with a lightness I had never felt before. Standing amidst the bustling crowd, I realized that I had finally, fully let go of the past. The pain, anger, and disappointment that once held me back were now behind me. There was no reason left to look back, no hesitation or attachment. Everything that had happened was now a chapter in my story, but it no longer controlled my path. Looking ahead, I saw that life held countless opportunities waiting to be embraced. Goals, dreams, and joys I had once forgotten now became clearer than ever. I reminded myself that it was time to move forward, to seek the peace and happiness that truly belonged to me. This new journey was no longer about sacrifice or regret but a path I chose for myself, free from anything that did not belong to me. As I stepped onto this new road, it felt as if I had set down a heavy burden, my heart lighter and freer. No longer haunted by what had happened, I realized I was ready to welcome all that was to come, challenges included. Life was now mine to shape, and I would find happiness and new meaning on this path ahead.